When I was 26, I decided to go to university, and it was around that age that I decided that I should try to get a diagnosis. And it turned out to be one of the biggest eye-openers of my life. I had always suspected that I was a little different from other people because of my experiences growing up and the fact that I did certain things that had me thinking ADHD could be a possibility. And of course, once I started education again, I realised that I was not able to keep up with reading and the learning and paying attention in class. So I started to really think, you know, maybe it's about time I went to get tested. And looking back on my whole life, when you go through the diagnosis, they walk you through childhood to present day, things really started to add up. The penny dropped. I just thought, yeah, it's so obvious. It's so obvious that I've got ADHD. So starting from childhood, apparently one of the earliest words I learned was procrastination, believe it or not. I remember in school, I lost about at least 30 coats and jackets throughout the entire time there. And that's not even an exaggeration. I lost so many belongings, it's unbelievable. You know, I would frequently leave things behind, and I'd only realise after I'd left that, oh, I've left my bag behind. And that happened countless times. I was always a bit of an oddball as a child, and I was pretty unpopular. I didn't really fit in with other kids. I just didn't really understand social interaction as much. And I think that's obviously something to do with the late development of the ADHD brain, right? Because the brain matures later than other people. I always had a very strong imagination, like scarily vivid imagination. So I don't know whether that's ADHD related, but I certainly lived in my own bubble most of the time. I think the biggest sign is a telltale sign for ADHD in my childhood was the fact that I accidentally got into trouble a lot. And that's typically from zoning out and missing the instructions and not knowing what was going on. The amount of times a teacher would say something and I'd sort of not know what's going on, and then other kids would get mad at me because if we were doing a group work, I wouldn't be able to join in. I'd be like, what do we do? And so I'd look stupid then, and that obviously causes self-esteem to drop. Self-esteem was pretty bad as well. I always had very low self-esteem growing up, especially as a teenager in those delicate years. It's a hallmark trait of ADHD. It's this feeling of being fundamentally incompetent. And I was always daydreaming, staring out the window in class, zoning out. Now in my adolescence, these behaviours got worse. You know, I had to have average grades, and in schoolwork I only really did well at the subjects that I had a real interest in. Everything else I just couldn't discipline myself to do the work. And it's still like that to this day. That's happening to me right now. Because I think the mind just doesn't get that sense of urgency. Nothing clicks. It doesn't sort of charge you up. It doesn't do anything for you. So therefore it's pretty much impossible to feel engaged in it. And towards my late teens, I think that's when the testosterone starts kicking in, and in combination with ADHD, that's pretty bad. I went through a phase where I sort of would binge drink a lot, and I'd make a fool of myself because I already had lower inhibitions because of the tendency to blurt things out. If you combine that with alcohol, it's a marriage made in hell. So moving on to adulthood, when I was in my early 20s, this was probably the most turbulent time of my life because I was just full of aggression and testosterone, and I had quite a short temper. I was very easily frustrated, and I was very emotionally immature. When I was younger, I lacked empathy. I was a lot more impulsive, and I just didn't really have much compassion. But the ironic thing is that I'm actually a very emotional person. So I think you can take that high emotion and channel it into empathy. You can use that emotion and put yourself in other people's boots. I'd sort of interrupt people a lot, and they'd be talking at me, and I'd be seething, I'd be bubbling up inside, and I just couldn't wait to get my opinion out. I couldn't wait to get my words across, and that's something I've learned to overcome. I remember I had a job as a cashier once, and I was so inattentive that I one time lost £100 in cash, and I still don't know what happened. How did I lose it? I don't even know. Just because my attention wasn't there. I would frequently get into trouble at work for being late, always late. Even though I knew full well ahead of time that I only had a certain amount of time to get to work, I'd still leave it to the last minute, or I'd just plan the morning routine poorly and I'd end up being late unintentionally. Either that, or it would be just making careless mistakes or being a bit too blunt towards bosses and colleagues. And oftentimes at work I'd put my foot in my mouth, and I'd get angry, and I'd just be like a little boy inside. And my boss once told me, "You are falling apart." So what does that tell you? Honestly, I'm amazed I never lost jobs. And I think at one point in my mid-20s, I realized that I had an immaturity problem. I realized, right, now I've got to really take control of myself and man up. I've got to really practice self-awareness. So I actually went to get therapy. I went to get CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. So I'm almost 30 years old now, and even to this day, I let things pile up. Typically I have mugs all over the place. I'll go downstairs, decide I want to drink, and take another cup or glass up with me, and eventually it would all pile up on my desk or pile up on my bedside table, and it keeps happening to this day. I suck at managing money as well, so that's something I'm working on. Just things like impulse spending is something I've been notorious at. Just spend, even if I didn't have the money, just because it would give me a rush. In hindsight, I wish I had known this when I was a child, but I think back in the 1990s, people were sort of unaware of it, and people usually put it down to the child just being undisciplined. But it explains so much of my history that it was kind of like a eureka moment. I think overall, because I was never a hyperactive child, it was harder to diagnose it. So inattentive ADHD, or ADD, is obviously going to be less easy to spot. I remember there was one kid in my class who obviously had ADHD. He was just so hyperactive. He was throwing stuff around the class, he was shouting, he'd get up out of his chair, he'd defy the teachers and shout. I wasn't like that, I was quite a shy kid. I was mostly a good boy, but my inattention just got me in trouble accidentally. But I've come a long way. And I think I've done really well. I've changed a lot. I've practiced self-awareness, and my life's changed for the better, but obviously there's still weaknesses there. That's it's just an innate part of my personality, and I think you can stay on top of it as long as you keep on practicing self-awareness and realizing that you have this condition that's affecting your mind and your behavior. So let me know in the comments below, when did you get diagnosed? Did you find out as an adult like I did, or was it something you found in childhood? If you enjoyed the video, give me a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button to get more content about how to help yourself manage your daily life. See you next time.